Our love for God never comes first. I read these words in the book, 60 Days of Becoming a Missionary Disciple, and I had to do a double take. What do you mean our love for God never comes first? I thought these are the two great commandments, to love God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and our neighbor as ourselves. But the author said our love for God never comes first. He pointed out that it's God's love for us that comes first. Our love for God, then, is a response to God's love for us. There's an old movie called Little Lord Fauntleroy. And in the movie, this little 7-year-old boy comes to move in with his wealthy grandfather. Now, the grandfather is this mean, cantankerous old man who's very harsh with his employees. But the little boy idolizes his grandfather and thinks he's this really kind and generous person. Over and over in the movie, he tells his grandfather, "Grandfather, how people must love you. I bet they love you more than I love you." Well, over time, this little boy's love for his grandfather begins to soften the old man's heart. You see, as the grandfather began to experience and receive love, he was transformed into a loving person. Well, in a similar way, God's love for us comes first. We have to know and believe that in our hearts, that God has a personal love for you and me, an unconditional love. And when we begin to experience that, it changes us and demands a response. We begin to love God. Well, how do we love God? I want to mention 5 ways. First, prayer. Okay, in any relationship, the first way a relationship begins to grow is the couple gets to know each other. St. Thomas Aquinas says we can't love what we don't know. So if we're going to grow in love with God, we have to first give God our most valuable resource. What's our most valuable resource? Our time. We have to be praying every day. I've encouraged all of us to take at least 20 minutes a day for our daily meditation. Prayer is about being with the one that we love. When you pray, you can use, for instance, the daily readings for Mass, the daily Gospel. Begin to read. Let God speak to you through His Word. Reflect on it. Enter into conversation with God. And then make a resolution. Lord, I heard you saying this to me in my prayer, and this is how I'm going to resolve to live today. Second way we grow in our love for God, by practicing the presence of God. Again, think of a couple growing in their love. I know couples who send little text messages or make calls to each other during the day, just saying little things like, "I love you, I'm thinking about you, I'm praying for you." Well, how often do we think about God? Do we think about the one that we love? When you love somebody, you think about them all the time. Have little reminders to remind yourself of God's presence throughout your day. I just recently downloaded a picture of Jesus for my cell phone. So every time I pick up my phone, I see the picture of Jesus and I'm reminded of the Lord. We think about the one that we love. We practice the presence of God throughout our day. That's the way we show our love. Third, we love God by honoring the Lord's Day. We commune with people that we love. This is what the Holy Eucharist is about. Worshiping on the Lord's Day is about communing with our God. What does it say about our relationship with God if we say, "You know what, Lord, this Sunday I have a soccer game or a dance tournament. I don't have time for you." One of the ways we show our love for God is by putting God first and at the center of our week, and in fact, the center of our day. Fourth, Cardinal Dolan says a barometer of our love for God is the frequency that we go to confession. Forgiveness is essential to any relationship. There's a priest who tells his couples that he marries, the 6 most important words in your married life are, "I love you" and "I'm sorry." The more we grow in our love for God, the more we find ourselves availing ourselves of confession and telling Jesus, "I'm sorry. I love you whom I've offended." And finally, what Teresa of Avila said was when she was asked, well, how do we really know that we love God? Teresa said, by the way we treat others. You see, this is where the 2 great commandments come together. We show our love for God by loving our neighbor. In fact, 1 John 4:20 says, if someone says they love God and hate their brother, they're a liar. I mean, we can't say we love God and then go around hating people. One of the ways we show our love for God is the way we treat other people. During one of the persecutions of Christians in the Roman empires, there was a Roman soldier who was particularly good at gathering up the Christians. And one of the fellow soldiers said, well, how do you do this? How do you know who the Christians are? And he said, well, that's easy. I know Christians by their love. In the book, The Collapse of Parenting, Dr. Leonard Sachs said, we're increasingly living in what he called a culture of disrespect. People lack civility. They lack mutual respect. I mean, just turn on the TV. We see people interrupting each other, arguing. People aren't listening to each other. It's sad on social media how much of social media is filled with rash judgments, presuming the worst about people, tearing people down. In the midst of all this darkness, our light is meant to shine. How do we shine our light in the midst of this darkness? By our little acts of love. Think about Paul's Canticle of Love from 1 Corinthians. We hear it all the time at weddings. Love is patient. Love is kind. Let's begin with patience. In a world that demands immediate results, increasingly, we're living under pressure. How much more impatience is important? Think of little ways that we can show our patience. For instance, with customer service. We can approach customer service with a smile, with patience, with gratitude for their service, and we can really build people up by our little acts of love. Rather than approaching people with irritability, rudeness, that diminishes our Christian witness. St. Paul says, love is never rude. What about the way we drive? Are we patient on the road? Are we courteous with other drivers? Or do we find ourselves reacting and losing our peace as we're driving? Paul says, love is not quick-tempered. Love doesn't brood over injury. It lets things go quickly. Love ultimately is the gift of oneself for the good of others. Love means losing ourself and being attentive to the needs of other people. St. John of the Cross said, in the twilight of life, we will be judged by our love. These two great commandments encompass the whole of the Christian life. To love God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and to love our neighbor as ourselves.